Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. It's a pleasure for me to be back with you after a week off, and it's an honor to have you here with me. Thank you very much for being here. And if you would be so kind as to raise your hand to indicate that you can hear me, you'll see a little raise your hand icon in the bottom. Very good. All right. Thank you very much for letting me know that I can be heard. And I hope you are all well. I hope everything is going very nicely in your garden. And let's take care of some other usual business. Housekeeping business. You can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options up in the upper right-hand corner. So if I'm too loud, you can turn me down. Hopefully I am loud enough. You don't have to worry about your mic or your camera because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you, unless of course you would like to make yourself heard, in which case you can avail yourself to either the Q&A box or the chat window. I have both of them open and I will see your comments and questions whenever you choose to pop them into either of those places. And with that bit of business taken care of, we can move on to a quick look back at our last class. We are in chapter 11. We covered verses 43 through 49. In this chapter, the Yoga of Divine Revelation, these verses are the conclusion of Arjuna's prayers offered to Krishna after the revelation of the universal form. We spoke a little bit about the four-armed form of Vishnu, which Krishna reveals to Arjuna on the way back to his two-armed form, and we will cover the verses of that return as we conclude the chapter this evening. We also spoke about Krishna's internal potency, that is to say, his spiritual potency through which he facilitates intimacy between himself and those who are devoted to him, the power that reveals him, through which he reveals himself to those who are devoted. This evening, we are going to finish the chapter as Krishna returns to his two-armed form. Arjuna's mental equilibrium will be restored after having been, his socks knocked off by the revelation of the universal form. And we'll speak a little bit about the means to see Krishna as he is. That is to say, Krishna will tell us very directly how one attains him. So these verses will be verses 50 through 55, completing the chapter. Before we begin, we will chant our invocation mantra for those of you who are new to the satsang and new to transliterated Sanskrit. The diacritical marks placed above and below or off at an angle beside the Roman letters give an indication of how to pronounce each letter. So the dot over the M indicates that we close the back of our tongue up to the back of the roof of our mouth as we bring our lips together in front. The bar over the A's in the last word indicate a elongated and more open sound as opposed to a short sound when we see the A without the bar. So I chant, you chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, who is the all-pervading transcendence. So this name for Krishna, Vasudeva, will show up in our verses this evening. We finished last week with the verse, text 49. Krishna, speaking to Arjuna, says, "You have been perturbed and bewildered by seeing this horrible feature of mine," indicating his form as time, the destroyer of everyone and everything. "Now let it be finished. My devotee, be free again from all disturbances. With a peaceful mind, you can now see the form you desire." So Arjuna has requested Krishna to return to his familiar form, rather than seeing this, what amounts to an illusion, almost like a magic trick, or more accurately, Krishna shows Arjuna how the magic is done, how he pervades the world and how he manifests as being everywhere all the time. And he shows the power of the Supreme Person. And in the material world, the ultimate power is time. No one can stop time. Time destroys everything. And this vision of time and all things, all in one place, past, present, and future, all happening at the same time, has quite understandably messed up Arjuna's mental equilibrium. So now Krishna is reassuring Arjuna that he can relax. He can be once again peaceful, as Krishna will show him the form that he desires to see, the more familiar form of his friend. Now, here's something to consider as we transition from last class's last verse to what we're going to speak about this evening. Krishna has shown Arjuna how the battle's going to end, and that everyone on the battlefield, save and except for he and his brothers, practically speaking, are all going to be vanquished. And whether Arjuna fights or not, this is still going to go down. Arjuna can walk away and everything will still happen as the will of providence dictates, but Arjuna will be known as the warrior who punked out. Or Arjuna can fight and get the credit for doing that which, for all intents and purposes, has already been done. Arjuna's disinclination to fight has two sides to it. One is that he's fallen under the influence of the illusion of material attachment. He wants everything to work out so that everybody lives happily ever after, and he can't figure out how to make it happen. He's attached to the results of his actions, and what he wants as a result is that everybody just gets along, and it's just not going to happen. But the other thing is a positive, which is that a devotee, someone who has divine qualities, saintly qualities, is always peaceful and never inclined to engage in such horrible acts as are required of a warrior in a wartime situation. So the revelation of the universal form was shown to Arjuna to let him know that he is not actually the doer of activities here. Remember early on, we heard Krishna speak about how under the influence of illusion, we tend to think that we are doing things, we are making things happen, when the will of providence is working through the qualities of material nature. It is not so much that we are the ones that are making things happen. So, as we'll see when we get to the last verse, this very wonderful quality of Arjuna to be merciful to all living beings is a natural saintly quality. That is to say, when one desires to become an instrument of God's will, and we understand that the Supreme Being is all loving, that the Supreme Person equally and unlimitedly loves every living being, then what happens is we become a vehicle for that love. This is the natural position of someone who desires to be an instrument of God's will. There's a very nice book that I've just started reading called Embracing the Call to Spiritual Depth by Tilden Edwards. It's actually a book of contemplative practices. It's specific to Christian contemplative thought and tradition. However, if one is interested in such a book but is not practicing Christianity, it is very easy, and he even recommends, a lot of this was actually inspired by his relationship with a Tibetan Buddhist monk. So he encourages one to kind of transpose these practices into the particular faith form one feels inclined to practice. Although if one is transposing the lessons of the Bhagavad-gita into their Christian faith, then this is a particularly valuable book, and the practices, I'm just getting started with it, but the practices seem very interesting and valuable. Anyway, so I bring it up because he writes about an exercise of seeing as we are seen. That is to say, exercises that allow us to step out of our own sense of self-image and self-judgment and to see ourselves as we are seen by others, and specifically as we are seen by the Supreme Person. So he writes, I'm going to share a little bit of this. He writes in some commentary on one particular exercise where one is gazing at an icon or an image of divinity. So whichever particular Ishta Devata is the Sanskrit word for a particular form of divinity that really resonates with you, speaks to you, the way that you approach the Supreme Being, the image through which you feel connected to the Supreme Being. So that's what he's using here. He's using a particular icon for this exercise. And he writes that a spontaneous repentance may take place, an empowered release of what is seen in me that needs to be relinquished. So we have already seen Arjuna engage in repentance in his prayers after seeing the universal form. That becomes possible because the gaze from the icon shows me an unchangeable love at the bottom of my nature. So there is no need for a protective stance. In grace times, the love encompasses and removes what is seen that obscures my true being in love. What is left after that liberation is a sense of belonging to that love, the spontaneous freedom to live in and from that love. As I move into life after such a time of prayer, I try to feather out its showings into the following hours by briefly recalling them at times, mentally or in my journal. When I am enabled to recall the radiant love at the center of reality, that awareness provides a perspective and compass for my activities in the moment. I am more able to live out of that love, however faintly. I realize who I truly am in God, a unique icon, an image of the invisible one through whom God loves, bears, and enjoys the world. So these are saintly qualities. And Arjuna is possessed of such saintly qualities. Therefore, that's one of the ways we can understand his reluctance to engage in the battle, not just a matter of he's in illusion and he's forgotten what he's supposed to do. So now let's move on to our verses for this evening. And if you have any questions or comments about anything at any time, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A or the chat, and I will look for them there. Meanwhile, our first verse of the evening is verse number 50. I'm going to go through all of our verses, and then we'll come back and look at each verse in detail. So we begin with verse number 50. Sanjaya, the narrator of the Bhagavad-gita, speaking to the blind king Dhritarashtra as he relates what's going on the battlefield, said, "The son of Vasudeva, having thus spoken to Arjuna, displayed his own four-armed form as before. That great soul then once again assumed his sublime two-armed form, thus calming the fearful Arjuna." Text 51. Arjuna said, "O Lord of all beings, Janardana, now that I see this beautiful human-like form of yours, my mind is settled and my consciousness has been restored to its true nature." Text 52. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Krishna said, "This form of mine that you now see before you is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods eternally aspire to see this form." Text 53. Neither by study of the Vedas, nor by performing austerities, nor by charitable giving, nor by sacrificial worship can I be seen as you have seen me. Text 54. However, by pure devotional service alone, O Arjuna, one can see and understand the truth about this form of mine. Thus one attains me, O subduer of enemies. Text 55. O son of Pandu, Arjuna, one whose actions are acts on my behalf, who understands me to be the supreme goal of one's life, who devotes themselves to me, who relinquishes all material attachments, and who holds no animosity toward any living being, is one who comes to me. So we'll go back and look at each verse in detail. So once again, verse number 50 from the 11th chapter, Sanjaya said, "The son of Vasudeva, Krishna, having thus spoken to Arjuna, displayed his own four-armed form as before. That great soul then once again assumed his sublime two-armed form, thus calming the fearful Arjuna." So in this verse, if you look at the word for word, what you see is that the son of Vasudeva displayed his own form as before. Four-armed form is what is implied here, and the commentators, the traditional commentators on the Bhagavad-gita, all agree that this is what is being referred to. In the Mahabharata, the book in which the Bhagavad-gita appears, and the Bhagavad Purana, or the Srimad Bhagavatam, the biography of Krishna, Krishna appears initially in the world in front of his parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, his mom, in his four-armed Vishnu form. And then, at his parents' request, he takes the form of a human-like newborn baby with two arms. When he grows up and assumes the position of a prince in his kingdom of Dwarka, he once again manifests this four-armed form. Not all the time and not to everyone, but he did show it to Arjuna, to the Pandavas, to the members of his close relations in his dynasty, and therefore this was not unusual for Arjuna. It would be pretty unusual for us to see anybody walking around with four arms, but apparently this was considered a regular feature of Krishna, that sometimes two arms, sometimes four. So hence the phrase "as before," because previously this four-armed form was manifest and Arjuna was familiar with it. This is a more formal form, the four-armed form, as opposed to the more casual two-armed form, which is more indicative of the particular kind of rasa, or flavor of relationship, that Krishna enjoys with Arjuna. In Sanskrit, this would be called sakhya rasa, or the mood of friendship or devotion in friendship. The particular Sanskrit phrase used to describe Krishna's two-armed form is saumya vapu, sublime form, beautiful form, gentle form. And upon arriving at this gentle form, as opposed to the mind-blowing, eating the whole universe with fire form, we find that Arjuna is immediately not just pacified, but check out how he says this in the next verse. This is verse 51. Arjuna said, "O Lord of all beings," Janardana is the particular name for Krishna that Arjuna uses here. "Now that I see this beautiful human-like form of yours, my mind is settled and my consciousness has been restored to its true nature." So the name Janardana means either chastiser of enemies in one context, or one who thrills human beings in another context. Sanskrit is like that. More importantly, for our purposes, I think, or at least what I find particularly interesting, is that now that Arjuna sees the beautiful, human-like, gentle form of Krishna, his mind is equipoised, settled, even, still. Whereas his mind was bouncing all over the place before, now his mind is calm. In other words, the sight of Krishna's beautiful two-armed form has stilled the fluctuations of Arjuna's mind. Stilling the changing states of the mind is, according to Patanjali, the very definition of yoga. And Arjuna further says, my consciousness has been restored to its true nature, or its original state is another way of translating this. So, restoring consciousness to its true nature is the reason for stilling the fluctuations of the mind. So we see here a nice example of yogic meditation. Meditation on the two-armed form of Krishna, the beautiful form of Krishna, and focusing one's attention on that attractive form. Krishna means all attractive. Brings the mind into a state of stillness and restores one's consciousness to its true nature. Try it. Let me know how that kind of meditation works for you. Another thing to consider here is how, even though Krishna has assumed this beautiful two-armed form, he shouldn't be mistaken for an ordinary human being or a material manifestation of something that is formless in its spiritual state. If Krishna were an ordinary human being, then how would it have been possible for him to show Arjuna his universal form and then to show a four-handed form of Vishnu, which in this particular culture everyone recognizes as Narayan, the Supreme Person, the original creator of the universe? How can seeing a ordinary human being induce the fulfillment of yoga? Actually, from a material standpoint, when we see beauty that suggests pleasure, it's disturbing to the mind, or at least makes the mind move, rather than the opposite, rather than stilling the mind, rather than bringing the mind into a state of equanimity. So this is a way to understand Krishna's beauty as categorically different from beauty as we know it in the material world. So this beautiful two-handed, two-armed form of Krishna is understood by the teachers in Vaishnava lineages or Vishnu lineages to be the origin of the four-handed Vishnu form, the origin of the universal form, and the origin of Brahman, the source of the light of universal oneness, as it is described as being the glow off the original spiritual form of Krishna. So let's hear now what Krishna has to say himself about this form that Arjuna is now seeing. This shows up in text 52. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "This form of mine that you now see before you is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods eternally aspire to see this form." So demigods refers to divinities, denizens of heavenly planets, the celestials, the population of planets in dimensions of this universe we don't have access to, who are in charge of so many different universal affairs. They wish to see this form, and they have heard of it, but it is very, very rare that they get an opportunity to see it because Krishna doesn't reveal it to them. The Sanskrit phrase in this verse, drishtavan asi, means are presently seeing, that which you are now seeing. This is like drishtavan, like drishta or drishti, where you put your vision. So all of these drish words in Sanskrit are all related to seeing. Darshan also, audience. Seeing a divinity is called darshan, or seeing a saintly person could also be called darshan. So drishtavan asi is sometimes translated as have seen in past tense, suggesting the four-armed form that was revealed just prior to Krishna resuming his two-armed form. The commentators in the Vaishnava lineages, the four different lineages of understanding the relationship between the individual Atma and the Param or Supreme Paramount Atma, or the Purushottama, the ultimate person, say that the demigods are aware of the four-armed form, but they have no access to the two-armed form, and that this phrase specifically indicates the two-armed form that Arjuna is currently seeing. Back in verse 11 of the 9th chapter, Krishna also confirmed that he is not visible to the foolish person who derides him. That is to say, someone who considers him just to be an ordinary person, who doesn't understand the transcendental nature of his appearance and activities in the world. So we go to the next verse, and Krishna tells Arjuna all the different ways that this beautiful two-armed form cannot be seen. So this is in the category of 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb, except there won't be 1,000 of them. So verse 53, neither by study of the Vedas, nor by performing austerities, nor by charitable giving, nor by sacrificial worship can I be seen as you have seen me. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different ways that you can't do it. The pursuit of knowledge, Veda means knowledge. So simply by the pursuit of knowledge, not going to happen. So it's not by intellectual breakthrough or insight that one has creates an opportunity to see this form of the Supreme Person. Not by performing austerities. We hear of yogis that will stand in a ice-cold river in the middle of winter, or sit in a circle of fire in the summer, or do other kinds of things that are obviously physically very, very challenging. Nope, not going to work. Nor by charitable giving. You cannot buy your way into heaven. Well, actually, that's not true. You can buy your way into heaven and then stay there for a little while and then come back. But that's not the same thing as being able to see this beautiful two-armed form of Krishna, because the demigods live in heaven. You can become one of them, but they are always hankering to see this form and they have no access to it. So that won't work either. Nor by sacrificial worship. In other words, religious ceremonies. That's good. They create very nice impressions on the mind that create an internal set and an external setting that's conducive for progress on the path of spiritual life. But these things alone will not work. Krishna will not reveal this form just on the basis of these things. Knowledge is good. You cannot love what you don't know, so knowledge should be there. Performing austerities, yes, if you just gratify every demand of your senses, you'll just get attached to the pleasures of material life, and then on account of them being temporary, incur the suffering of their loss in due course of time, and who knows what else might show up as you accumulate good and bad karma, as you chase your, you engage in the pursuit of sensual pleasure. So austerity, also good. Charitable giving, also good. Sacrificial worship, also good. But none of these things by themselves, nor all of them together, will cause Krishna to reveal this form. So Arjuna is looking at this form. What's his qualification if it's not any of these things? Well, it's the very thing that he was afraid of when he was seeing the universal form, namely his love for Krishna in the mood of friendship that caused him to be so casual and cavalier in his conversation and dealings. So he expressed fear about committing offenses, about having offended the Supreme Being by being so casual, when he was seeing the Supreme Being in that form of Aishvarya, or opulence, or power. But now that he's seeing Krishna in his beautiful form, he's relaxed. And that kind of relaxed intimacy is what Krishna enjoys a whole lot more than worship or acts of charity or any of these other things he's listed. So this brings us to a verse that we're going to chant, and it's not a verse in the Bhagavad-gita for a change. We're going to chant a different verse. This is a verse from the Brahma Samhita, Sri Brahma Samhita. This is verse 38. And this verse describes how one sees this beautiful form of Krishna. And this is Arjuna's qualification. Krishna will speak to this in the last verse of this chapter, and we're going to chant that verse as well. But I thought it would be nice to step out of the Bhagavad-gita and chant this verse. You may notice that there are a lot more syllables in this verse than we usually find in verses in the Bhagavad-gita. In fact, it's longer than the longest of verses in the Bhagavad-gita. And I thought that would be another reason for us to chant it. We get a chance to chant a different meter based on a different number of syllables per couplet. So I'll chant each line, you chant each line back, and we'll do it a couple of times. Remember that the tilde over an N in transliterated Sanskrit is a nya sound, so the middle of the tongue in the middle of the roof of your mouth with a little body English to it, nya. You pronounce each letter, so when you see two C's together, include that, first of all, the C is a CH sound, and a C followed by an H is the same CH sound, but with some extra air added after it. The dot under an R, you draw the tip of your tongue back into the center of the roof of your mouth. And let's see what else we have here. The accent mark over an S is a deep SH sound all the way in the back of one's mouth, as opposed to a regular SH sound behind one's teeth. Shh. Dot under an N is a sound. It almost kind of comes out your nose rather than out the front of your mouth. And the dot under the S is a regular SH sound. I think that covers it, I hope. So here we go. I chant, you chant back. Premang janakshurita bhakti vilochanena Santasa daiva hridayeshu vilokayanti. Yang Shyama Sundaram Achintya Gunat Swarupam. Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. One more time, I'll take it from the top. Here we go. Premang Janach Churita Bhakti Vilochanena. Santa Sadhaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti. Yang Shyama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam. Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Translation. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Shyama Sundara, Krishna himself, with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts with the eye of devotion, tinged with the salve of love. So this verse is spoken by Lord Brahma, the chief among the demigods, and he is the exception to the rule insofar as the demigods are concerned, because he has had a vision of this form of Krishna, and therefore upon this revelation he composed these verses. So Shyama Sundara is a form of Krishna. Shyama means blackish. So in the commentary to this particular verse, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, who has given us this translation, states that Krishna's inconceivable, simultaneous, personal and impersonal, self-contradictory form is known as Shyamasundar. And those who are devoted to Krishna see this form in their purified hearts under the influence of a devotional trance. So samadhi, the eighth limb of yoga, is often translated as trance. And when one is practicing meditation in the bhakti yoga tradition, then the trance or the entrancing object of meditation is this form of Shyama Sundara, or Krishna in his very, very beautiful two-armed form. So, as we've discussed earlier, Krishna is covered by his internal potency, his yogamaya potency. This yogamaya potency can either reveal or hide Krishna. So we read in the Mahabharata, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the pastimes of Krishna, that Krishna appears like a person, and people see him when he manifests his activities on planet Earth, but not everybody understands who he is. He appears very differently according to the nature of the relationship. Some people they see him, but they don't recognize him. Just like, for example, if the president of Romania walked down the street and I walked by him or her, see, I don't know. I wouldn't recognize the president of Romania. I have no idea who the president of Romania is or what they look like. So they could walk right by me and I would see a person, but I wouldn't recognize them. So similarly, for those who were in the right place at the right time, they saw Krishna, but they didn't recognize Krishna. Whereas learned sages, they look at Krishna and they see all of the indications of the Supreme Person. They understand who he is. But his most intimate associates, they see Krishna and they are just looking at him with different qualities of love. So they're not really seeing his position. They're seeing his beauty. They're seeing his charm. And that's because he's revealing that aspect of himself, that more personal aspect of himself to those who love him. So only someone whose eyes are tinged with the salve of love have the eyes to see Krishna. And here, in these last two verses, Krishna will speak to this point directly. So this now is verse 54. However, by pure devotional service alone, O Arjuna, one can see and understand the truth about this form of mine. Thus one attains me, O subduer of enemies. So remember, this section of the Bhagavad-gita is specifically the section on Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotional service. And herein, Krishna is being very direct. In previous chapters where the discussion is about karma yoga or the how karma yoga is informed by knowledge, jnana yoga, and how those two go together, or how one performs mystic yoga, raja yoga, or ashtanga yoga. The fulfillment of all of these paths of yoga always shows up as devotion. Devotion is always the thing that you need in order to make it work, and everything, all these other paths of yoga ultimately resolve in bhakti. But here, once again, Krishna in this section of the Gita is making it clear that devotional service by itself, bhakti yoga as a standalone practice, that is enough, because it is the practice of the expression of love, and it is only in reciprocation of the offering of love that Krishna reveals himself in this particular form, and that is the only means by which one can attain Krishna. So one of the Sanskrit words in this verse is ananyaya, which means unalloyed, without being mixed with any ulterior motive for gaining anything, no material desire to be fulfilled by the offering, or speculative knowledge. Rupa Goswami, one of the teachers in the Vaishnava lineage of which I'm connected to, gives a definition of pure devotional service in a book called Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So this was written in the early 16th century, I believe. Kavita, which word would you like me to repeat? Oh, Ananyaya, A-N-A-N-Y-A-Y, long A. If that's okay, very good. So you'll find that word in the verse, and then a very similar word is used right up top in Rupa Goswami's definition of pure devotional service. That definition in Sanskrit goes like this: Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam anukulyena krishnanu shilanam bhaktir uttama. That verse translates as one should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Krishna favorably and without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. So that is an elaboration on this word ananyaya, unalloyed or without being mixed with anything. In other words, pure devotional service, like pure orange juice, nothing but orange juice, no water, no additives. Which brings us to the last verse of the chapter and for the evening. But first, just a visual, just to get an idea of the distinction between the four-armed form, which for those of you who are watching, we see here. This is the four-armed form of Lord Vishnu with the thousand-headed serpent Ananta providing a nice umbrella and carrying the four objects, the two weapons, the club and the disc, and the two objects of benediction, the conch shell and the lotus flower. So here, this is a very regal, very beautiful, but very regal kind of form. The power and majesty of the Supreme Person is on display in this form. By contrast, the form of Shyamasundara, the beautiful, gentle form of Krishna, usually depicted in what is called Tribhangi form, or threefold bending form. So bending in three places, with leg cross, playing his flute, and in a very beautiful and gentle pastoral surrounding. This is Krishna as a youth in Vrindavan, his beautiful forest dwelling of his childhood. Of course, this is now 100 years later, past Krishna's childhood, so he still has this beautiful youthful form, a little more mature looking, and he's decked out in the regal garb of a prince as he is accompanying Arjuna on the battlefield. But still, in this particular human-like form, it is his beauty that is overwhelming and not the opulence. So that will bring us to our final verse, and we will chant this verse. This now is a 16-syllable meter, meaning that there are 16 syllables in each couplet. So this will seem easy by comparison, perhaps. So once again, I'll chant each line, you chant each line back, and the dot under an H at the end of a couplet indicates that you echo the vowel that precedes that H back. Otherwise, it's just a short stop when that dot under the H appears anywhere other than at the end of a line. And I think we're good to go. Here we go. I chant, you chant back. Mat karma krin mat paramo. Mad bhakta sangavarchitaha. Nirvaira sarva bhuteshu. Yatsa mam iti pandava. One more time, each line. I chant, you chant back. Mat karma krin mat paramo. Mad bhakta sangar varjitaha. Nirvaira sarva bhuteshu. Yasa mam eti pangdava. Translation, O son of Pandu, one whose actions are acts on my behalf, who understands me to be the supreme goal of one's life, who devotes themselves to me, who relinquishes all material attachments, and who holds no animosity toward any living being, is one who comes to me. So this covers all of our bases insofar as the 4 different paths of yoga are concerned. And as we began with a reading from Embracing the Call to Spiritual Depth by Tilden Edwards, Krishna indicates that one who is a medium for his love for all beings, that's one of the qualifications for attaining the Supreme Person. So the first part, mat karma krin, covers karma yoga, one whose actions are acts on my behalf. Karma yoga is action that is performed as an offering to the Supreme Person. That is an act that is a liberating action. Work for Vishnu must be performed. Back in the 3rd chapter, we heard Krishna speak about this. Otherwise, that work will bind one to samsara, the cycle of birth and death. So this is a karma, or Krishna karma, karma yoga. Then, mat paramo, jnana yoga, that is to say, one who understands me as the supreme goal of life. The jnana yogis understand that the ultimate goal of life is to understand the Supreme Being. Therefore, they dedicate their lives to the pursuit of knowledge about the absolute truth. Mad bhakta sangha varchitaha. This is bhakti yoga, one who devotes themselves to me, Krishna, relinquishing all material attachments. And then nirvaira sarva bhuteshu is Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga. The ethics of yoga begin with ahimsa, non-harming. Therefore, one, by the practice of non-harming, has no enemies, has no animosity towards any living being. So in this one verse, Krishna encapsulates how one engaged in pure devotional service or pure bhakti reaps the benefit, the ultimate benefit, of all the other paths of yoga described in the Bhagavad-gita, that is to say, the 4 traditional paths of yoga within the Vedic system of the science of self-realization. And that brings us to the end of our chapter on the yoga of divine revelation. We spoke a little bit about Krishna's beautiful 2-armed form, Shyamasundara, how seeing this form returns Arjuna to a state of mental equilibrium, stills his mind, and restores his consciousness to its original or true nature. And we spoke about pure devotional service as the means to see Krishna as he is. So, if you have any questions or comments, now is a great time to offer or ask them. And if you have questions after the fact, you can send them to me at hari@harikirtana.com. I'm always very, very happy to hear from you, so please do not hesitate if you have any questions, or if in the course of finding ways to integrate any elements from tonight's talk into your yoga and meditation practice. I would love to hear about how that's working for you or how that's changed things for you if you've had any experiences of those kinds. Next week, we begin chapter 12, the Yoga of Devotion. This is the last chapter in the 6-chapter section dealing specifically with Bhakti Yoga. Personalism or impersonalism? Arjuna will ask Krishna some questions about the distinction between the yogis who pursue realization of Brahman, the impersonal aspect of the absolute truth, or personalism, those who pursue a relationship with the personal aspect of the absolute truth. And we will discuss in the course of examining these two approaches to the absolute truth, the way of the monkey versus the way of the kitten. And we will speak about freedom from the cycle of birth and death. We will cover the first 7 verses of chapter 12. And that will do it for this evening. Thank you very, very much for your kind attention. It's always a great pleasure for me to spend this time with you, an honor to have you here with me. I hope to see you here next time. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Kavita, you're very welcome. My pleasure. All right. Have a nice night.